My son's wife. 3 words, forced out of a mouth that hadn't spoken clearly in 5 years. And Vittoria Ferraro said them while fastening the family bracelet around the wrist of a maid. There were 400 guests in that ballroom, 5 families, 12 daughters of the most powerful men on the East Coast, and every one of them had been brought there for the same reason, because Stefano Ferraro was 38, unmarried, and the most feared man in New York. His mother rolled her wheelchair straight past all of them, straight past Vanessa Costa, the girl everyone had already crowned. She didn't even look at her. She kept going, all the way to the back wall, where a maid stood holding a tray with both hands and her eyes on the floor. Anna Delaney, 27 years old, 8 years in that house, and not one person in that room could have told you her name, because Anna couldn't speak. Not a whisper, not a word, not since she was 19. The old woman's hand was shaking as she slid off the bracelet that 3 generations of Ferraro wives had worn and closed it around the wrist of the girl who cleaned her floors. Then she lifted her chin and said it out loud, in front of everyone. The room went so quiet you could hear the ice settle in the glasses. Somebody laughed, once, and stopped. Nobody moved, because nobody knew what they were supposed to do with what they'd just seen. And Stefano set down his drink, because he was looking at his mother's face, and his mother wasn't confused. She looked like a woman who'd been trying to say those 3 words for 8 long years, and had finally found a way. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't the only one in that house who'd been silenced. And the man standing closest to his mother's chair, the man already reaching to wheel her away, was the one person in that ballroom who understood exactly what she was doing. If a story like this is worth your time, go ahead and hit that like button for us. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we tell these stories every single week. Now let's get back to that ballroom. Sound returned to that room not through words, but through the clink of a glass against a tabletop somewhere in the back. Then the scrape of a chair being pulled across the floor. Then the sound of a man clearing his throat, as though he were trying to remind the entire room that they were all still breathing. Vanessa Costa was the one who truly broke the silence. A short laugh burst from her, just one sound. The kind of laugh people use when they've been struck across the face in front of a crowd and don't want anyone to see that it hurt. She turned toward her table, picked up her purse, and as she passed the place where Stefano stood, she didn't look at him. She stared instead at the wrist of the woman standing close to the wall. "Congratulations, Stefano," she said, just loudly enough for the 2 nearest tables to hear. "Your mother has a better sense of humor than I thought." Then she walked out through the main entrance, unhurried, moving slowly enough for all 400 people to watch her leave and understand that someone had just been humiliated tonight. Her father followed, even more slowly. He stopped in front of Stefano and placed a hand on his shoulder in exactly the way an older man might place a hand on the shoulder of a younger man to appear warm and familiar, and he left it there 1 beat longer than necessary. "Your mother is ill," he said. "Everyone understands that. We all have mothers, and we all know that there comes a time when they're no longer responsible for the things they say." He patted Stefano's shoulder twice. "You understand me, don't you? My daughter flew here from Chicago. She isn't accustomed to people laughing in her face. Neither am I." He lowered his hand. "Good night, Stefano." Then he walked away. Stefano didn't answer with a single word. He didn't watch him leave either. He remained exactly where he was, one hand still resting loosely beside the glass he had just set down, his eyes never leaving his mother. Julian Rourke was beside the wheelchair before Vanessa's laughter had completely faded. He moved so quickly that later, whenever Stefano remembered that night, the only detail he couldn't put into its proper place was that one. The fact that Julian had already been there, his hands already on the wheelchair handles, his body already bent until his mouth was level with the old woman's ear, before anyone else had time to react. "You're tired," Julian said, speaking loudly, far louder than a man needed to speak to an old woman sitting barely 16 inches away. He spoke loudly enough for the people in the front row to hear, then turned his head and repeated himself for those farther back. "The old lady is tired. She's spent the entire week preparing for tonight. Every single day. She's 71 years old. Which one of us would still be clear-headed at this hour when we reach her age?" Somewhere in the room came a faint ripple of laughter, the grateful laughter of people who had just been given a more comfortable way to understand what they had witnessed. Vittoria Ferraro jerked her head up. She struck the left armrest with her hand, once, then twice, and the sound was dry and small and frightened no one, but she kept striking it, while her eyes searched for her son in the crowd, and then clung desperately to him. Her throat moved. Nothing came out. "We'll take you upstairs to your room," Julian said, and he had already signaled to 2 of his men before he finished the sentence. "Call Mrs. Sloane. Tell her to come tonight." Right away, the wheelchair turned away. The old woman kept her eyes fixed on Stefano until the crowd closed behind her and he could no longer see her. 400 people stood there, waiting for him to say something. They waited for him to laugh it off. Waited for him to explain. Waited for him to catch the excuse Julian had just thrown into the room and tie it up neatly for everyone. Stefano took 3 steps toward the small platform where the band had long since stopped playing. He didn't pick up the microphone. He didn't need to. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Tonight ends here." That was all. Not one word about his mother. Not one word about the bracelet. No apology and no denial. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward the side door. And the entire room began moving behind him in the way a crowd always moves when it has finally been given permission to leave, but hasn't been told what it has just witnessed. Cars were called. Coats were brought out. People spoke to one another in lowered voices, and no one spoke of anything else. Within 40 minutes, the great hall was empty. The servers began clearing away the glasses. Someone turned off half the lights. And against the wall at the far end of the room, Anna Delaney remained exactly where she had been, both hands still holding the tray, the bracelet still resting on her left wrist, heavy and strange and never meant to belong to her. No one told her to leave. No one told her to stay. For 8 years, she had always known precisely where she was supposed to stand and when she was supposed to go. And for the first time in all those 8 years, no one in that house knew what to do with her anymore. Close to midnight, Stefano went up to his mother's room. Mrs. Sloane had already gone home, leaving a brief message with the night attendant that the old woman was fine and simply needed sleep. Vittoria wasn't asleep. She sat propped against the pillows, both hands resting on the blanket, and when her son entered, she immediately searched for his eyes, exactly as she had searched for him in the great hall several hours earlier. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "Mother," he said, "I need you to tell me what just happened." Her throat moved. She began with a shapeless sound, then tried again, and this time those 3 words fell from her lips once more, broken into pieces, distorted, but unmistakable. "My son's wife." "I already know what you said," he told her. "I want to know why." She repeated the words for the 3rd time. He reached for the notebook on the bedside table, the one she had used for the past 5 years to point to pre-printed letters whenever she needed something, and he placed a pen in her hand. Her right hand trembled. She managed to grip the pen and lower it to the paper, but all that appeared were 2 crooked lines crossing over each other. Not letters, not a picture, not anything at all. She looked down at the page. Then she did something Stefano hadn't seen his mother do since his father's funeral. She cried. There was no sound, only tears running down both sides of her face, and she didn't wipe them away. The pen remained in her hand, and she tried to write once more, but that attempt produced nothing either. He took her hand in his and held it still. "Enough," he said. "You need to rest." She shook her head. She shoved the notebook toward him with such force that it fell from the bed onto the floor, then pointed toward the door again and again as she spoke those 3 words for the 4th time. He stood, picked up the notebook, returned it to the bedside table, and left the room. In the hallway, he stopped for longer than he had intended. Then he called the night attendant. "The girl carrying the tray tonight," he said. "Bring her down to the study." Anna entered his study close to 1 o'clock in the morning. She was still wearing her work clothes. Her apron was still in place, and the bracelet remained around her left wrist. She stopped 3 steps from his desk, her hands lowered at her sides, and looked directly at him. That was the first detail he noticed. In this house, people looked down at the floor when they stood before him, not because he demanded it, but because they knew to do it on their own. This girl didn't look down, nor did she stare at him in defiance. She simply looked at him, calm and steady, as though she had been waiting for this summons for hours, and now it had finally come. "What did you say to my mother?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Anna reached into the pocket of her apron and took out a small hardcover notebook with worn corners and a short pencil. She opened the notebook, wrote something, then turned it around and placed it on the edge of his desk before pushing it toward him. "Nothing. I can't speak, sir." He read the words, then looked up. "I know you can't speak," he said. "I asked what you did." She pulled the notebook back, wrote again, and pushed it across the desk. "I carried out the tray. I stood by the wall. She came to me. Before that, I changed her sheets at 4 o'clock. I opened the east-facing window. I gave her the medicine at 5 o'clock. And what did she say to you?" Anna's pencil paused for a moment. Then she wrote, "She can't speak, sir. Just like me." Stefano read the sentence twice. He placed the notebook on the desk but didn't push it back to her. "That bracelet," he said. "Do you know what it is?" She nodded once. "Do you intend to keep it?" She picked up the notebook and wrote, but this time, Instead of pushing it toward him, she held it up so he could read it from where she stood. "If you tell me to give it back, I'll give it back. I can do it right now." She raised one hand to the bracelet's clasp and waited. He said nothing. She lowered her hand. He watched her standing there in the middle of a room that grown men entered with sweat covering their palms, and he realized that she wasn't afraid of him. It wasn't recklessness, and it wasn't indifference. She simply wasn't afraid, in the way of someone who had lived through something far worse than being summoned by a man like him at 1 o'clock in the morning. He sat down in his chair. "How long have you worked here?" 8 years. 8 years, he repeated. He meant to ask another question. One about his mother. One about who had arranged for her to stand in that precise place tonight. But the question that left his mouth was something else entirely. "What's your name?" Anna looked at him for another second. Then she wrote, more slowly than before, and pushed the notebook across his desk. "Anna Delaney." He stared at those 2 words on the page. She had been in this house for 8 years. For 8 years, she had lifted his mother from bed every morning and laid her down again every night. He had passed her in the hallways no fewer than 1,000 times, and it wasn't until 1 o'clock that morning that he learned her name. The next morning, the affairs of the Ferraro family still had to keep moving. At 9 o'clock, a man named Dominic was brought into the study and invited to sit in the chair across from the desk. He had overseen a shipping route in Red Hook for 6 years, and for the past 4 months, the numbers he reported hadn't matched the numbers Gideon Marsh counted at the other end. He spoke for 4 full minutes. He talked about the warehouse, about a delayed shipment, about a middleman who hadn't kept his word, and Stefano allowed him to finish. Julian stood beside the liquor cabinet, poured 2 glasses, carried one over and placed it in front of Stefano, then stepped back. Stefano lifted the glass and took a sip without looking down, his eyes remaining fixed on Dominic's face, and he returned it to precisely the same spot. When Dominic paused to draw breath, Stefano spoke. "I don't repeat myself, that was all." He didn't raise a hand, didn't stand, didn't call for anyone. Dominic sat motionless for 3 seconds as the color drained from his face, then rose on his own, buttoned his jacket on his own, and walked to the door on his own. The door closed very softly behind him, as though even the sound of it was something he didn't dare leave behind. Julian poured Stefano another half glass. "You're really letting him walk away," he said. "He knows what he still owes," Stefano replied. "He'll pay." Julian perched on the arm of a chair, slowly turning the liquor in his glass, and remained silent just long enough for his next words to sound like a thought that had only just occurred to him, rather than something he had prepared the night before. "My telephone didn't stop ringing last night," he said. 3 families. No one said it outright, but every one of them asked the same question. They wanted to know who was behind that girl. Stefano didn't answer. "I told them the old lady was ill," Julian continued. "I told them that in the Great Hall, and I told them again over the telephone. But with you and me sitting here alone, I'll tell you the truth, Stefano. I don't believe this was only about an old woman being ill." Stefano lifted his glass. "Go on." 8 years, Julian said. 8 years sitting beside the bed of a dying old woman, washing her body, feeding her, sleeping in a room 2 doors away so she could be there whenever the old woman called during the night. Think about it. Who does that work for 8 years without asking for anything? She never asked for a raise, never asked for time off, never complained once. People don't live that way unless they're waiting for something far greater than a monthly wage. He set down his glass. No one does all that out of kindness. That isn't kindness. It's patience. And patience like that always comes with a price. Stefano looked out the window. In his mind, those words settled beside the image of a girl standing 3 steps from his desk at 1 o'clock in the morning, one hand raised to the bracelet's clasp as she waited for him to tell her to remove it. "She offered to give me the bracelet," he said. "Last night, I didn't take it." "Of course she offered to give it back," Julian said immediately. "Think about it. If she clung to it, you would have thrown her out the door within 10 minutes. But she offered to return it, and now you're sitting here thinking about her. Don't you see? That's exactly what I'm talking about." Stefano didn't argue. "Give me 3 days," Julian said. "I want to know where she came from, who recommended her for work in this house, who paid the rent on the room where she lived before she came here, whether she has any family, whether she has debts, whether there's anyone standing behind her. If I don't find anything, I'll be the first to tell you I was wrong, and I'll personally apologize to her." He said it in the voice of a man who truly hoped he was mistaken. "But if I do find something," he said, "it's better for you to know now than to learn after she's been wearing that bracelet for 6 months." Stefano turned back. He looked at Julian, the man who had stood beside him for 15 years, the man who had sat at his right hand in every meeting since his father died, the man who, 8 years earlier, had wrapped his arms around Stefano and dragged him out of a room when everything inside it shattered at once. Stefano had never needed to inspect a glass of liquor poured by those hands. 3 days, Stefano said. Don't touch her. Don't question her. Don't let your men go near my mother. I understand. And Julian, he paused. No one in this house has ever been found guilty because of an unanswered question. Go ahead and search. But bring the answers to me first. And then I'll decide. Julian nodded, finished the liquor in his glass, and left. Alone again, Stefano returned to his desk. In the top drawer, the small hardbound notebook with its worn corners remained exactly where he had placed it the night before. He hadn't given it back to her. He opened the drawer, turned to that final page, and looked at the 2 words written in the center in handwriting that was strangely neat, the handwriting of someone who had spent her entire life with only that one way to let other people know she existed. Gideon Marsh didn't wait the full 3 days. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, he knocked on the study door, entered, and placed a thin file on the desk. It was so thin that Stefano looked at it, then looked up at him. This is everything? This is everything that exists, Gideon said. And that's precisely what I need to talk to you about. He opened the file and turned it around. Anna Delaney. There's a date of birth. There's a social security number, legitimately issued through the proper channels. Her driver's license expired a long time ago and was never renewed. No criminal record, no credit history before she turned 20. No cards, no loans, no accounts. This family has paid her salary by direct deposit every month for 8 years, always on the same day, and she's barely withdrawn any of it. She has nearly 200,000 sitting in that account. Stefano looked up. 200,000. You heard me correctly. A servant who hasn't spent her own money in 8 years. Gideon turned to the next page. Now we come to the part I don't like. Before she was 19, there's nothing. No school records I can trace. No residential address registered in her name, or in the name of a guardian. No medical records. Nothing at all, Stefano. I tried 3 different avenues. I had people search the records in Albany. I had them search New Jersey and Connecticut as well, in case she wasn't born in this state. And a child who grows up in America has to leave a trace somewhere. If she attended school, her name would be on a list. If she got sick, there would be a record. If her parents filed taxes, their child's name would appear on them. Even abandoned children have thick social services files. Gideon tapped a finger against the page. A person doesn't simply become this empty. When someone is this empty, it means they were deliberately erased. And erasing someone this completely isn't something a person can do for herself. There had to be someone with money, connections, and a reason. Stefano remained silent for a long time. What about relatives? No one. No father, no mother, no brothers or sisters. No one who ever co-signed or acted as guarantor for her in any matter. During her 8 years here, she hasn't received a single outside call through the house switchboard. No one has ever visited her. Not once. Who brought her into this house? Gideon paused. That's where I reached a dead end. Her employment contract exists and was signed according to proper procedure, but the referral section is blank. I asked the head chef. He said that at the time, he was merely informed that someone new was coming down to help in the kitchen. No one remembers who gave the order. It was 8 years ago. Stefano closed the file. In his mind, everything arranged itself into a single line, and that line led in only one direction. A woman with no past had been brought into his house in the very year he took his father's place. She had remained for 8 years without asking for anything, without spending her money, without anyone on the outside, and throughout those 8 years, she had done only one thing. She had sat beside the bed of the one woman in this house whom he would never suspect. Then, on the very night, 400 people gathered beneath his roof to watch him choose a wife. That woman pushed her wheelchair through the crowd and gave Anna something that the Ferraro family had bestowed upon only one person in 3 generations. No one plants a knife inside an enemy's house and leaves it lying there for 8 years, Gideon said, as though he could read Stefano's thoughts, unless they know how to wait. The telephone on the desk vibrated. Vanessa Costa's number appeared on the screen. He allowed it to ring 3 times before answering. Do you know what the entire city is saying? She didn't bother to greet him. They're saying your mother isn't confused at all. They're saying she was perfectly lucid and that she made her choice. Do you know how that makes me look, Stefano? I flew here from Chicago just to stand there while a servant girl walked past me. What do you want? I want you to make a statement out there. Just 1 sentence. Say that none of it meant anything. I don't make statements until I know whether they're true or false. She gave a bitter laugh. Then let me tell you something my father told me not to say. Someone is very pleased about what happened that night. It isn't my family. You should ask yourself who benefits when the Ferraro name becomes a laughingstock among all 5 families at once. She ended the call. Stefano set down the telephone, and those words only pushed him farther along the path he was already following. Someone benefited. Someone had spent 8 years waiting to reach that night. He opened the drawer, took out the small hardbound notebook, and looked once more at the 2 words on the final page. He had asked how long she had worked there, and she had answered 8 years without hesitating for even a second, as though she had counted every single one. He closed the drawer and called Gideon back into the room. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "before dawn, I want her out of this house." At 4:25 in the morning, Stefano went downstairs himself. He allowed no one to accompany him, and he didn't tell Julian. Anna was already standing at the end of the kitchen corridor with a single cloth bag at her feet, and from the size of that bag, he knew at once that during her 8 years in this house, she had accumulated nothing. She wore a coat over her usual clothes. The bracelet was still around her left wrist. "Walk with me," he said. They left through the side door and followed the gravel path from the main house to the outer gate, and throughout those 4 minutes, neither of them did anything but walk. It was still dark and cold, and the lamps along the path remained lit. When they reached his car, parked near the gate, Stefano stopped and took a check folded in half from his coat pocket. He opened it and held it out to her. "Take this," he said. "It's enough for you to go anywhere and begin again. Someone will take you to the train station or the airport this morning, whichever you choose. If you want an address in another state, I can arrange that as well." Anna didn't reach for it. She looked at the check, then raised her eyes to his face, still meeting his gaze in precisely the same way she had in the study that night. "Take it," he repeated. "I'm not asking whether you want it." She took the notebook from her coat pocket, the short pencil tucked into its spine. She wrote something, tore out the page, then did 2 things in succession. First, she removed the bracelet from her wrist. She unfastened it carefully with both hands, then placed it on the hood of the car. Second, she laid the piece of paper beside the bracelet and used the bracelet itself to keep the wind from carrying it away. Then she stepped back. Stefano picked up the paper. "I have never asked this house for anything." He finished reading and looked up, still holding the check in his other hand. "If you don't take the money, how will you leave?" She wrote another line in the notebook and held it up for him to read. "I can walk. There's a bus on the main road. It's 4:30 in the morning. Then I'll wait." He looked at her for a long time. Then he folded the check, returned it to his pocket, and stepped back. "All right," he said. "The gate is open." Anna bent down and picked up her bag. Before she turned away, she did something he would remember for a very long time. She turned her face toward the house, found the 3rd-floor window at the eastern corner, and stood looking at it for exactly 3 seconds. Only 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked through the gate without looking at him or stopping, moving straight ahead with her shoulders held steady and the cloth bag in her left hand. The gate closed behind her. Stefano remained where he was. The bracelet still lay exactly where she had placed it on the hood. He picked it up, and it still held the warmth of her skin. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. He didn't regret his decision. He had made it in his mind the previous afternoon, and in 15 years of being in charge, he had never reversed a decision merely because of the way someone walked out through his gate. He opened the car door and sat down, and his telephone vibrated in his hand before he could insert the key. "Gideon, where are you?" "At the outer gate. Don't start the engine. Listen to me first." Gideon's voice sounded nothing like it usually did. "I'm sitting in the security room. There's a car parked among the trees across the road, about 220 yards from the gate, to the north. A dark sedan. It's been there since 11 o'clock last night. I rewound the footage. 6 hours. It never leaves the engine off for long. Every half hour, it starts again to keep warm. License plates. There aren't any. No plates on the front or the back." Stefano sat upright. "It just pulled away from the trees," Gideon said. 30 seconds ago. Its headlights are off. It's creeping behind her along the sidewalk on the right, keeping the same distance and never overtaking her." 2 seconds of silence passed. "Stefano, I managed to enlarge the front of the car. There's a parking permit in the corner of the windshield. That kind of permit is only issued at 3 parking lots. All 3 belong to our own people." Stefano said nothing. He stared through the windshield, past the closed gate, toward the dark road beyond, where a woman carrying a cloth bag was walking toward the main road, unaware that something was creeping behind her. And in his mind, the entire orderly line of facts he had arranged the night before began to collapse. Because if Anna Delaney was only a servant, then her departure from this house meant nothing to anyone. If she had been planted here to wait for 8 years, then whoever had planted her would have come to collect her, not followed her through the darkness in a car stripped of its license plates. There was only one possible explanation for what was happening out there. Someone had waited for 6 hours for the precise moment she stepped outside the Ferraro gate, because as long as she remained inside this house, no one could touch her. And whoever that person was, they had known in advance that she would be cast out this morning. Stefano started the engine and drove through the gate, but instead of turning in the direction Anna had taken, he went the opposite way, circled through the intersecting street, and accelerated enough to complete the loop in less than a minute. He didn't want to chase the other car. He wanted to be in front of it. He reached the main road, pulled toward the curb, and stopped across the entrance to the sidewalk on the right, both headlights shining at full strength. Anna was approaching from about 50 feet away. She stopped and raised a hand to shield her eyes. Behind her, the dark sedan creeping through the shadows suddenly came to a halt. It remained still for about 2 seconds. Then it politely switched on its turn signal, slowly turned into the street on the left, and disappeared without accelerating or roaring its engine, moving like the car of a respectable person simply driving home. It was that calmness that sent a chill down Stefano's spine. People only withdrew that neatly when they knew they would have many more opportunities. He reached across and opened the passenger door from inside. "Get in." Anna didn't move. "I'm not asking," he said. "Get in." She looked toward the street where the sedan had disappeared. Then she looked at him. Then she lifted her cloth bag, walked around the front of the car, and climbed inside. He drove away. For the first 3 minutes, neither of them did anything. He didn't ask a question. She placed the bag at her feet, rested both hands on her lap, and stared straight through the windshield. The streetlights swept across her face, one after another. When they reached a red light at the large intersection, he stopped and turned toward her. "Who wants to kill you?" Anna didn't react immediately. She didn't startle, didn't quickly shake her head, didn't do what any innocent person would do upon hearing that question, which was to ask what he meant. She simply sat still. Then she took a telephone from her coat pocket. It was an old device, its screen covered with scratches. She unlocked it, tapped an application, and Stefano saw a white text box appear with a small speaker button in one corner. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She remained that way for several seconds. Then she turned off the screen, returned the telephone to her pocket, and took out her notebook. She opened it to the next blank page, wrote one line, and held it up. "I don't know. You're lying to me," she wrote again. "I don't know the name. I don't know the face. But you know there is someone." She wrote nothing more. She closed the notebook, placed it on her lap, and looked out the side window. The light turned green. Stefano continued driving. He went exactly 3 blocks before turning the car around and heading back toward Oyster Bay. "I'm taking you back to the house," he said. "Listen carefully to the reason why." She turned toward him. "It isn't because I trust you. I still don't. 2 days ago, I read a file about you that contained nothing at all, and a person with no past is either someone who has suffered terribly or someone extremely dangerous, and I don't yet know which one you are." He kept his eyes on the road. "But someone sat outside my gate for 6 hours waiting for you to walk out. That person knew in advance that you would leave this morning. Only 4 people in my house knew that, and I'm one of them. That means someone inside my house is working for someone else, and you're the only thing I have that can draw him into the light." He spoke the next words in precisely the same voice he used when reading a number to an accountant. "I'm not taking you back to protect you. I'm taking you back because as long as you remain inside my house, that person will have to keep reaching out. You're bait. You're not a guest. I'm telling you plainly so you can't accuse me later of hiding it from you." Anna nodded once, short and decisive. Then she opened her notebook, wrote something, and handed it to him when he stopped at the next red light. "I know. I understood the moment you told me to get into the car." He read the sentence and couldn't answer at once. He had prepared himself for fear, for bargaining, for her to demand something in return. He hadn't prepared himself for her to accept it so quickly, like someone who had long ago grown accustomed to being used for other people's purposes. "Aren't you going to ask what I'll give you in return?" She shook her head. Then she wrote again, and this time, she took longer. "I only ask one thing. Don't tell her I was thrown out. She waits for me to open her window every morning. If no one opens it this morning, she'll know something is wrong." Stefano read the words, then looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 5:12 in the morning. He drove a little faster. "You'll make it back in time," he said. They didn't make it back in time. The moment the car entered the courtyard, Stefano heard the sound coming down from the 3rd floor through a window left slightly open. The steady, dry knocking of a hand striking the metal bed rail. Anna was out of the car before he could turn off the engine. She left her cloth bag on the seat and ran inside through the side door. By the time he reached the room, 3 people were already there. The night nurse stood at the foot of the bed, holding a glass of water she seemed to have no idea what to do with. The housekeeper stood close to the wall, and Vittoria was sitting upright in bed, her hair disheveled, one side of her nightgown slipping from her shoulder, striking the bed rail with her left hand in a steady rhythm, her eyes wide and fixed on the doorway. An open notebook and a pen lay on the blanket. Stefano picked up the notebook. The entire page was covered with lines crossing and crushing into one another, and in several places, the paper had torn because she had pressed down too hard. Not a single word was legible. There was only one thing repeated in the corner of the page, a closed circle drawn over and over again 5 or 6 times. "She's been delirious since about 5 o'clock, the nurse said. "We tried giving her water, turning on the lights, playing music. She wouldn't accept any of it." Vittoria didn't look at her son. She looked past his shoulder. Anna entered the room. She didn't run to the bed, didn't speak with her hands, and didn't make any gesture that resembled an attempt to soothe her. She walked straight past the other 3 people, went to the east-facing window, and opened it. That was all. The old woman's striking hand stopped in midair. Anna turned, went to the bed, pulled Vittoria's nightgown back over her shoulder, then took her left hand and lowered it onto the blanket. She kept her own hand resting over it. The old woman released one long breath, her shoulders lowered. She leaned back against the pillows, closed her eyes, and the entire room suddenly became so quiet that they could hear the wind beyond the open window. The whole thing took less than 20 seconds. Stefano remained where he was, the notebook still in his hand. He looked at the nurse and the housekeeper, the 2 people his family paid to care for his mother, and both were staring at Anna with the expressions of people who had just witnessed a magic trick they had seen many times before and still couldn't understand. Mrs. Miriam Sloane arrived at 7 o'clock. She examined Vittoria for about half an hour, then found Stefano in the hallway. He handed her the notebook. "My mother wrote this last night," he said. "Look at it for me. Is she getting worse?" Mrs. Sloane took the notebook, opened it, and studied the page carefully, for longer than he expected. "May I ask you something?" she said. "How do you usually speak to her?" "I ask whether she can eat, whether she can sleep, whether she's in pain anywhere. What about questions longer than that?" "I don't ask her anything longer than that." Mrs. Sloane closed the notebook. "Your mother doesn't have dementia, Mr. Ferraro. She has motor aphasia. She understands every word you say." Stefano didn't answer. He heard the words, and a silence opened inside him that he couldn't immediately understand. "Say that again." "What has been damaged is the pathway from her thoughts to her mouth and to her hand," Mrs. Sloane said, "not the thoughts themselves. For the past 5 years, she has heard and understood every sentence you've spoken in that room, and she simply couldn't answer. That includes the things you said to other people when you thought she could no longer hear you." She returned the notebook to him. "And I'll be honest with you about this. These aren't the marks of someone who's confused. They're the marks of someone trying to say something and knowing perfectly well that she's failing." She drew the circle in the corner 6 times. 6 times means she wasn't mistaken. "She was trying to give you something." Mrs. Sloane left, but Stefano remained in the hallway for a long time. He thought about the past 5 years, about the voice he always used when he entered that room, the voice people used with children, slow and louder than necessary, made of short sentences. He thought about the night of a family funeral, when he had sat in the chair beside that very bed and discussed business with Julian for 40 minutes, directly in front of her, because both men had assumed that only 2 people in the room could understand what they heard. He turned back and opened the door. Vittoria was asleep. Anna sat in the chair beside the bed, her small notebook lying face down on her lap, her gaze directed through the east-facing window, which remained open. He didn't enter. He stood on the threshold and studied the way she sat, the posture of someone who had sat in precisely that place for 8 years, and for the first time, he wondered what she had heard in that room during all those years. 3 days later, on a quiet afternoon, Vittoria was taken down to the glass room in the south wing, where she was brought twice a week so she could sit in the sunlight. Stefano went there because he needed somewhere quiet for a telephone call, but when the call ended, he didn't go back upstairs. He remained in the chair at the far end of the room and watched. Anna said nothing, of course, but she wasn't silent either. She placed 2 cups in front of the old woman, one containing tea and the other water, then lightly touched her index finger to the rim of the cup on the left, then to the rim of the cup on the right, and waited. Vittoria looked at the cup on the right. Anna lifted the water and gave it to her. No question had been spoken. There had been no sound of agreement and no nod, yet the old woman had just been asked a question and had answered it. Then Anna raised both hands in front of her chest, her palms facing each other, and slowly opened them as though opening a book. Vittoria shook her head. Anna closed her hands, then changed to another gesture, tracing a small circle in the air with 2 fingers. The old woman nodded. Anna moved behind her, pushed the wheelchair close to the glass wall, turned it slightly, then stepped away. Vittoria sat there looking out at the garden, breathing evenly, peaceful and still. Stefano remained at the end of the room, and he understood something that unsettled him so deeply he had to shift in his chair. During the past 8 years, he had walked through this room hundreds of times, and each time he had seen only one thing: a maid doing her job, pushing a chair, offering a cup, drawing a curtain. He had seen service, but what was happening before him wasn't service. This woman was asking his mother what she wanted, and his mother was answering. Anna wasn't merely caring for her, she was translating for her. And for 8 years, everyone in this house, including Stefano himself, had stood outside a conversation taking place before their eyes every day, without anyone realizing it was happening. He rose and walked over. "What did you do with those 2 cups?" Anna took out her notebook. "She can't point anymore. Her hand won't stay still, so I point for her. And she only has to look." "And what did those gestures with your hands mean?" "I asked whether she wanted me to read to her. She didn't. I asked whether she wanted to go outside and look at the garden. She did." "Is that sign language?" "Not exactly. Some of the signs are real. I learned them from books. The rest are signs the 2 of us invented." She wrote another line. "Half of them were her idea. When she could still speak, she taught me the first few signs." Stefano read that sentence twice. "When my mother could still speak," he repeated. "Before her stroke." Anna nodded. "Can you teach me?" She looked up at him. It was the first time he had ever seen her hesitate before answering a question. Then she wrote, "Yes, but you'll have to begin with the first letter. There are no shortcuts." "How long will it take?" "That depends on how much you practice. You'll be slower than she is. She's had 8 years to practice speaking with her damaged hand." He read the words and found no trace of mockery in them, only a fact laid plainly before him. "Start now," he said. She raised her right hand, closed it into a fist, and pressed her thumb across her fingers. He copied her. She studied his hand, then adjusted her own so he could see the correct position. They reached the 5th letter before someone called for him from the hallway and he had to leave. Late that night, Stefano remained alone in his study. He took the bracelet from the drawer, the one he had picked up from the hood of his car that morning, and placed there without giving it another thought. He turned it slowly in his hand. Old gold, smooth on the outside, marked by the scratches of 3 generations of Ferraro women. His mother had worn it for 34 years. His grandmother had worn it before her. He had seen it around his mother's wrist since before he was tall enough to see over the tabletop. He turned it over, held it beneath the desk lamp, and tilted it toward the light. On the inside, close to the clasp, was a line of very small engraving. It wasn't a name. It wasn't anyone's initials. It was only a date, October 17th, 8 years earlier. He sat motionless, staring at it. He knew the inside of that bracelet well. As a child, he had played with it on his mother's wrist hundreds of times. There had never been any engraving there. These marks were newer, shallower than the scratches around them, added by someone afterward. He took out his telephone, opened the calendar, and searched back 8 years. There was nothing on October 17th of that year. No one's birthday, no anniversary of anyone's death, no meeting, no journey, no name. Yet he remained there for a long time, with the bracelet in his hand, because something inside him recognized that date before his memory could reach it, and the feeling made both his shoulders turn cold. The photograph appeared on Thursday morning. It had been taken from behind and at a slight angle, from precisely the position of someone standing within the crowd and holding a telephone at waist level, and the image contained only 3 things: an old hand fastening the bracelet, a slender wrist, and the corner of an apron. No faces were visible. No faces needed to be visible. Within 6 hours, the photograph had passed through all 5 families, and by afternoon, it had traveled beyond their circle. Gideon carried a computer into the study and placed it on the desk. "People are passing it around out there," he said. Someone even added a caption. "It says the Ferraro family is about to have a new lady of the house, and she won't have to say a single word." Stefano studied the photograph for about 10 seconds. Who took it? There were 400 people in that room, and every one of them had a telephone. I traced it through 3 transfers, then lost it at the 4th. But look at this. Gideon enlarged the image. The person who took it was standing about 13 feet away, facing the platform. That night, the only people in that area were our own people and the band. The summons came on Friday evening. No one called it a summons. It arrived as an invitation to dinner at a Manhattan restaurant, closed to the public for a private gathering, and the letter included a wish for his mother's swift recovery. All 4 of the other families attended. They finished the first course before anyone placed a napkin on the table. Vanessa Costa's father was the first to speak, and he spoke with great courtesy. "First of all," he said, No one at this table blames Vittoria. She's ill. We all hope she recovers. He allowed those words to rest for a moment. But you need to understand what's happening out there, Stefano. In 3 weeks, we're due to sit down and divide the harbor and dock shares. You're the man who occupies the chair at the head of the table. And right now, in Philadelphia and Boston, people are passing around a photograph and laughing. They aren't laughing at you. They're laughing at all 5 families. Because if the Ferraro family gives that position to a servant girl, then what is that position worth? And what is the alliance preserving it worth? Another man continued, speaking even more gently. We haven't come here to give you orders. Your father was my friend, but I have 42 men on my payroll, and they're asking me questions I can't answer. The third man hadn't spoken throughout the meal. At the end, he said only one thing: 30 days. No one explained further. There was no need. At that table, the number 30 meant Stefano had 30 days to declare publicly that what happened that night had no meaning, and to confirm a marriage to the Costa daughter. Otherwise, when the time came to divide the shares, someone else would occupy the chair at the head of the table, and the other 4 families would stand on the opposite side. Not a single threat was spoken aloud. That was how men threatened one another at that table. On the drive home, Julian sat in the front seat and turned his entire body around. Did you notice what I said in there? You didn't say anything. Exactly. I didn't speak, because I know you hate having someone else speak for you. But now that it's only the 2 of us, I'm asking your permission to say it. He paused for precisely 1 beat. Accepted. Stefano looked through the car window. I sat beside your father for 10 years, and I've sat beside you for another 5, Julian said. I've never asked you for anything. Today, I'm asking. Marry the Costa girl. 30 days is more than enough. You don't have to love her. You don't have to look at her face more than twice a week. This isn't about any of that, and you know it better than I do. This is about the chair. He lowered his voice. As for the other woman, let her remain and care for your mother. No one will touch her. I'll personally guarantee that to all 4 families. You can keep both things. All you have to do is step forward and say 1 sentence. What sentence? That your mother is ill. The words fell into the car and remained there. Stefano turned his head and looked at him. You said those words in the great hall, he said, loudly, loud enough for the last row to hear. Julian laughed. The laugh of a man caught worrying about his friend. Was anyone else saying anything at the time? You were standing there like a statue. If I hadn't spoken, those 400 people would have walked out the door with a far worse story. The car traveled some distance farther. The 3 days you asked for, Stefano said. They ended last week. Have you found anything about her? No, Julian answered immediately. Nothing at all. Completely clean. Completely clean, Stefano repeated. He didn't say another word until the car reached the gate. The next morning, Stefano summoned Anna to the study for the 2nd time. She entered, stopped in the same place as before, and he realized that she was once again standing exactly 3 steps from his desk, not even half an inch closer. Last night, the other 4 families called me to Manhattan, he said. They gave me 30 days. Within those 30 days, I'm expected to make a public statement that what happened that night meant nothing, and I'm expected to marry the Costa daughter. If I don't, I'll lose my chair when the shares are divided. Anna showed no surprise. She simply stood there, waiting for him to say the rest. I won't make that statement, he said. She raised her eyes. It isn't because I'm a decent man, he continued. I want you to understand that. If I publicly declare that my mother is confused, I surrender my own right to make decisions in this house. From that day forward, whenever she does anything, someone will remind me that I was the one who said she was no longer in her right mind. I won't hand anyone that weapon. He tapped 1 finger against the desk. But I need 30 days. During those 30 days, I have to find whoever sat outside my gate that morning, and I need a reason for the other 4 families to remain still while I search. He opened the drawer, took out the bracelet, and placed it on the desk between them. Put this back on, he said. For 30 days, you'll appear beside me in public as my fiancé. You'll go to several places, stand beside me, and you won't have to say a word, which is something you can do better than anyone else in this city. At the end of those 30 days, I'll pay you enough that you'll never have to work for anyone again. I'll take you out of the state and change your papers if that's what you want. You'll disappear, and I'll take care of everything else. Anna looked at the bracelet on the desk. She didn't pick it up. She took out her notebook and wrote, If I stand beside you for 30 days, whoever sat outside the gate that morning will know exactly where I am every day. Yes, you're telling me that instead of hiding it from me, I already told you in the car. I don't change my word. She continued writing. I won't take the money. He leaned back in his chair. Say that again. I won't take your money. Not now. And not after 30 days. Why? Her pencil paused for a moment. Then she wrote, Because if I take it, everything I've done for the past 8 years will become something with a price. I don't want it to have a price. Stefano read the sentence and asked no further questions about the money. Then why will you do it? Anna closed the notebook, and this time she stepped forward once. She opened it again and wrote on the edge of his desk. She waited a very long time to say those 3 words. I don't know why, and I didn't ask. But that night, she managed to say them. If you step outside tomorrow morning and tell the entire city that she was only delirious, she'll hear it. She hears everything. You know that now, and she'll have no way to argue. She pushed the notebook toward him. I'll do these 30 days for her, not for you. He read the words, then nodded once. All right, he said. Tell me what you need. She turned to a new page. She wrote slowly, and she wrote only 1 line, then left the page open before him without adding anything more. Don't make me lie to her. Stefano studied that sentence for a long time. Explain, she wrote beneath it. You can ask me to stand beside you wherever you want, wear whatever you want, and let people take as many photographs as they want. I don't care what people outside this house think of me. I'm used to it. But if she looks at me and asks whether any of this is real, I won't nod. I'll give her the truth. You need to accept that now, instead of blaming me when the time comes. When he finished reading, he pushed the bracelet across the desk toward her. I accept, he said. But I'm going to ask you one question, and you'll answer honestly. If she asks you, will you tell her everything, including the fact that I threw you out through the gate at 4:30 in the morning? Anna picked up the bracelet. She fastened it around her left wrist and turned the clasp into its proper position. Before leaving the room, she wrote one final line and left the notebook open on his desk. She already knows about that. That morning, she struck the bed rail with her hand for 40 minutes. The first time Anna appeared beside Stefano in public was at a birthday celebration honoring an elder in a Brooklyn restaurant, with all 3 families present. She made a mistake within the first 10 minutes. When the hostess rose to leave the table, Anna stood as well and began gathering the dirty plates into a neat stack, moving with the practiced ease of a reflex formed over 8 years. The entire table fell silent. A woman across from her leaned toward the person beside her and spoke in a voice quiet enough to be called a whisper, yet loud enough to reach the opposite end of the table. Anna put down the stack of plates and returned to her seat. She didn't blush, and she didn't lower her eyes. She drew in her chair and sat with her back straight, as though she had merely finished an ordinary task. Stefano slowly moved his gaze around the table, looking at each person in turn, and the conversation changed by itself. On the drive home, he asked whether she wanted to learn a few points of etiquette. She wrote a brief answer. No need. It's only 30 days. He didn't insist. But he remembered that no one at the table saw anything wrong with what they had just done. The meeting with Emmett Shaw's people took place 4 days later at a club on the Lower East Side that remained closed during the day. The other side sent a man in middle age who arrived 20 minutes early, accompanied by 2 men and carrying a briefcase. Julian sat to Stefano's right, while Gideon stood against the wall behind them. Anna sat 1 chair away from Stefano, her notebook resting on her lap. And for the first half hour, she did nothing but sit in silence. The other man spoke pleasantly. He asked after the old woman's health and mentioned Stefano's father in a respectful voice. Then he conceded 2 points Stefano had spent the entire week preparing to fight for, so quickly that Julian glanced sideways, and suggested they sign the documents that very afternoon at the Southern warehouse instead of waiting until the following week as arranged. Let's go now and finish it, he said. My car is parked outside. The whole thing will be done in exactly 1 hour. Stefano was about to nod. He had already raised a hand to close the papers in front of him. Then a notebook slid very quietly across the table toward him without making a sound. He has looked at the back door 4 times. He doesn't intend to leave through the front. Stefano read the line without changing his expression. He placed his hand over the notebook, leaving it exactly where it was, and remained silent for 3 seconds. Then he spoke. We aren't signing today. The other man laughed. Why not? You and I have already settled everything. Next week, as arranged, at my place. I brought all the documents with me, then take them home. Mr. Shaw won't be pleased. Then he can call me. Stefano stood. The other man rose as well, and during the half-second before he could rearrange his expression, something passed across his face that Stefano caught in full. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't disappointment over a failed agreement. It was panic. The man shook hands, smiled, then took his briefcase and left through the front door. But he remained on the steps longer than necessary, looking in both directions along the street before descending. Gideon called that evening. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, at precisely the time we were supposed to be inside the Southern warehouse, 2 cars were parked in the alley behind it. They didn't belong to Shaw's people. I checked. They waited until nearly 7 o'clock before they finally left. Stefano said nothing for several seconds. "Why did you cancel?" Gideon asked. "You were about to nod. I was standing behind you. I saw it. Someone noticed before I did," Stefano said. He ended the call and remained alone for a long time. He thought about the people who had laughed when she gathered the plates in Brooklyn. Then he thought about that afternoon, when an entire room filled with experienced men carrying weapons had listened to a pleasant man speak, and not one of them had noticed anything. The only person who saw the danger was the only person in the room who couldn't speak a single word. When people are busy listening, they stop looking. And when no one has ever asked a person anything in her entire life, only one thing remains for her to do, and that is watch. 3 nights later, Gideon carried a computer into the study close to midnight. "I was going to leave this until morning," he said, "but you should see it now." The screen showed black and white footage of the basement hallway, with a clock running in the lower corner. 2:17 in the morning. A figure entered the frame. She moved slowly, carrying no light, never glancing around like someone afraid of being caught, but walking like someone who knew the way. Anna. She traveled the length of the wine cellar corridor, turned left, and stopped before the final door. It led to an old storage room that had been locked and sealed since before Stefano took control of the house, and during the 8 years he had occupied this chair, he had never had any reason to open it. Anna didn't test the handle or bend down to inspect the lock. She simply raised her right hand and pressed her entire palm against the door. Then she remained that way. Gideon advanced the footage. She stood there for 4 minutes. Then she lowered her hand, turned, and walked out of the frame. Stefano rewound the footage, watched it once more from the beginning, then froze the image at the exact moment her hand touched the wood. He sat before that still image for a long time, because during all 8 years Anna had lived in that house, no one had ever told her what lay behind that door. At 6 o'clock the next morning, Stefano went down to the basement with Gideon and a locksmith. He didn't call Julian. It took 40 minutes to open the door, and when it finally gave way, the first thing that struck them was the smell of dust from a room that had been sealed for 8 years. It wasn't a storage room. In the center of the floor stood a long table covered with a white cloth that had yellowed with age, and on the table were objects Stefano recognized immediately, because he had stared at them throughout the final night when he was still his father's son, and not yet the man occupying his chair. The Ferraro family's crystal glasses, 24 of them, the silver decanter used for the investiture ceremony, the tray. Everything remained in its proper place, unwashed and untouched. Gideon stopped on the threshold. "What is this?" "This is the night I took my father's place," Stefano said. A piece of paper lay at the edge of the table, pinned beneath the base of the decanter. He pulled it free. 3 lines had been written in his mother's handwriting from the years when she could still write. The firm, slanting hand he had seen on every birthday card she had given him for 30 years. "No one is to enter this room. Do not wash anything. If I die before I understand what happened, give everything to my son." He read the 3 lines 4 times, then handed the paper to Gideon. Gideon read it and looked up. And in the 15 years they had known each other, it was the first time Stefano had seen him unable to speak. Stefano called the private laboratory his family used to inspect shipments. Their technicians took samples from inside the decanter and from 3 of the 24 glasses. The results arrived 4 days later. Gideon carried the report into the study and placed it before Stefano without saying a word. Inside the decanter were traces of an industrial corrosive compound, the kind used to clear pipes, colorless when mixed into a dark liquid. All 3 glasses were clean, only the decanter was contaminated. "No one put something like that into a decanter to kill an entire room," Gideon said. "You put it into the decanter so it can be poured into one glass. The first glass. The glass everyone in that room stood and raised in your honor that night." Stefano remained still. "The cameras," he said. "Did this house have cameras that night?" "Yes. An old system with mechanical drives. I already searched." Gideon spoke slowly. "The main drive is still in the cabinet, but the footage from 10 o'clock that night until 2 o'clock in the morning was deleted. It wasn't a malfunction or a power failure. It was cut out cleanly. Exactly 4 hours. Stefano looked up. "You said the main drive is still there. That means there was another one." At the time, the system was configured to synchronize with a second drive as a backup. It was kept in the equipment room in the attic. Everyone forgot about it when the house changed to the new system. It sat in a cardboard box for 8 years. It took me 3 days to find someone who could read the format. Gideon placed a computer on the desk. "Do you want to watch it alone?" "Play it." The footage was black and white, recorded from a high angle overlooking the Great Hall. Gideon advanced it to 10 o'clock at night. People entered, gathered in groups, Then the entire room moved toward the platform. Stefano saw himself at 30, standing in the center. And he saw his mother on the left, still able to walk, still able to speak, one hand resting on his shoulder. The tray was brought out. The decanter filled a glass, and that glass was handed to him. Everyone in the room raised their drinks. In the left corner of the image, a small figure emerged from the doorway leading to the kitchen. She wore the clothes of a kitchen helper. She didn't walk. She ran. She slipped between two people and charged directly into the circle of raised glasses. And for about 1.5 seconds, all the screen showed was an arm reaching out and wrenching the glass from Stefano's hand. Then she tilted back her head and drank every drop. Someone released a glass, and it fell to the floor. The girl remained standing for about 3 seconds, one hand gripping the edge of the table, then folded forward, and the entire image shook when someone collided with the post supporting the camera. When the picture steadied, she was lying on the floor with 4 or 5 people gathered around her. Stefano, at 30, remained exactly where he had been, his hand still raised as though the glass were still in it. Then a man approached from behind, wrapped both arms around Stefano's shoulders, turned him 180 degrees, and dragged him from the room through the side door. For the first 3 steps, Stefano kept trying to look back. The other man forced his head down and pushed him onward. The side door closed. Gideon froze the image. On the screen, during the half-second before the door shut, the man's face was turned directly toward the camera, and it was the face Stefano had sat beside in every meeting for 8 years. He said nothing. He reached for the mouse, rewound the footage 15 seconds, and played it again. Then once more. The third time, he no longer watched the girl. He watched Julian, because for 8 years, whenever anyone asked about that night, Stefano's own mouth had spoken the same words. Julian was the one who pulled me out of there. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't be sitting here. He had said those words at dinner tables, at conference tables, at funerals, and he had spoken them with genuine gratitude. Back then, in the ensuing chaos, Julian had quickly claimed the clumsy kitchen maid had merely collapsed from a sudden seizure after ruining the toast, having her whisked away before anyone could question what happened. For 8 years, Stefano had believed the lie. Now he sat before a frozen image and saw exactly what was happening within it. That man hadn't dragged him away to protect him. That man had dragged him away so Stefano couldn't turn back in time to see who was standing beside the decanter, and to ensure the dying girl was silenced before she could utter a single word. Stefano returned to the basement room that same night. The first time he entered, he had looked only at the table. This time, he examined everything else. Against the inner wall stood a metal filing cabinet that he had passed before and assumed was empty. It wasn't. In the top drawer was a heavy file folder with a handwritten label, and that label contained only one line: October 17th, 8 years earlier. He opened it. The first document was a copy of an admission record from a Manhattan hospital. Female patient, 19 years old, admitted through the emergency room at 11:42 that night. Diagnosis: corrosive chemical injuries to the esophagus and larynx. The prognosis was written in a single brief line: permanent loss of vocal function. The person who guaranteed payment of the hospital expenses and was listed as the responsible party was Vittoria Ferraro. He turned the page. The patient's name was Anna Delaney. Stefano sat down on the floor where he stood, in the middle of a room that had been sealed for 8 years, the file resting on his knees. The date on the document matched the engraving inside the bracelet exactly. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't anyone's birthday. His mother had taken the bracelet worn by 3 generations of Ferraro women and had the date engraved upon it when a 19-year-old girl lost her voice because of her son. The rest of the file was much thicker. It contained 3 years' worth of documents, arranged in chronological order, and every piece had been assembled by his mother alone. There were payment receipts from 3 different private investigation firms, none of them aware of the others. There were handwritten statements, listing cash expenses line by line. There was a list of 21 names belonging to people who had been present in the Great Hall that night, with a diagonal mark beside 19 of them. 2 names remained unmarked. There was a bundle of receipts from a data recovery company in New Jersey, and at the very back were pages she had written for herself, each one fully dated, and Stefano read them in the exact order in which she had written them. At first, the sentences were long, coherent, and sharp as knives. Then, with each passing year, the handwriting grew smaller, and the sentences became shorter. On the next to last page, she wrote that she had discovered why the 4 hours of footage had been removed, and that only 2 people in the house had access to the equipment room that year. The final page contained only 3 hurried lines, written in a hand that had already begun to tremble. She wrote that the company in New Jersey had called her, that the backup drive in the attic was readable, and that she would tell her son the following morning. The date on that page was exactly 1 day before her stroke. Stefano remained motionless in the basement for a long time. Then he carried the entire file upstairs to the 3rd floor. It was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Vittoria was awake. Anna sat in the chair beside the bed, and when she saw him enter with the file in his hand, she rose, and for the first time in 8 years, he saw the color leave her face. He placed the file on the edge of the bed. Then he did something he had never done before anyone in his life. He knelt beside his mother's bed, rested both hands on the edge of the blanket, and looked directly into her eyes. "You knew, Mother," he said. Vittoria didn't move. "You knew from that night. You signed the hospital papers for her. You paid the bills. You brought her into this house, then erased every record bearing her name so no one could discover that she was still alive." He heard his voice break in the middle of the sentence, but he didn't stop. "Then you went looking for the person who did it. Alone. For 3 years. You didn't say a single word to me." Tears ran down her cheeks. She remained motionless. "Why didn't you tell me?" Vittoria slowly raised her left hand. She didn't reach for paper. She didn't search for a pen. She placed her fingertips against her throat, in the hollow beneath her chin, and held them there. Then she turned her head very slowly and pointed the same hand toward the bedroom door. She kept pointing in that direction. She wasn't pointing into the hallway. She wasn't pointing outside. She was pointing toward the rest of the house. Stefano understood both things at once, and the second sent a deeper chill through him than the first. She couldn't tell him because by the time she found the answer, she had lost her voice. And that person was still inside this house. He took her hand and lowered it onto the blanket. "I understand now," he said. "Rest, Mother. Let me handle it from now on." He rose and turned away. Anna was still standing at the foot of the bed, and he looked at her, then at his mother, and saw the 2 women clearly within the same frame. One had lost her voice because she drank from his glass. The other had lost hers because she went searching for the person who had poured it. Both women knew the same truth. Both had lived in his house for 8 years without being able to speak a single word of it to him. And throughout those 8 years, he had passed them every day, sat down to eat with the people on his payroll, and listened to thousands of spoken words, while the only thing he had ever truly needed to hear remained trapped inside 2 throats that could make no sound. The next morning, Stefano went to her room on the 3rd floor. The door stood slightly open. Anna was folding clothes into the cloth bag, the same one she had carried to the gate that morning. She heard him and stopped, but she didn't put the bag away. "You're planning to leave." She took out her notebook and wrote, "You already know. If I stay, I'll only be someone who knows too much." "Sit down," he said. He placed another notebook on the table. It wasn't the one she used now. This one had a faded, soft cover, and its spine had been repaired with tape that had yellowed with age. He had taken it from the bottom drawer of the metal cabinet in the basement. Anna looked at it and sat down on the edge of the bed. "You recognize it, don't you?" She didn't write anything. She only nodded, very slowly. "My mother kept it for 8 years. He opened it. The first pages were filled with the uneven handwriting of someone lying in bed, and writing with the hand she didn't normally use. Some pages contained only 3 words. "I'm thirsty. I'm cold. I'm all right." Then came longer entries, written more steadily with a different pen. "I don't want to call the police. I don't have anyone they can contact. Please don't worry about me. When does the doctor say I'll be able to speak again?" Then there was a page containing only 1 line. "So it's never." Stefano turned another page. He had read the entire notebook 3 times during the night, yet he still had to stop at that one. Then he opened it to the last page containing her handwriting and turned the notebook toward her, even though she was the one who had written it. "Don't tell him. If he knows, he'll go looking for the person who did this. He has occupied the chair for only 1 week. He doesn't know which people are truly his. He'll go looking, and he'll be the next person to die. I already drank it. Don't let that be for nothing." The room remained silent for a long time. "You were 19, Stefano said. Anna looked down at her hands. "You were lying in a hospital. You had just learned that you would never speak again. And this is what you wrote." He tapped one finger against the page. "Tell me, who did you see that night?" She picked up her pencil. She wrote slowly, taking a very long time to produce 1 short sentence. "I saw him standing beside the decanter. I came up from the kitchen carrying more napkins. I was standing in the doorway, and I saw him there alone while everyone in the room was turning toward the platform. Then what happened? I didn't see him put anything inside. I only saw him standing there, and I saw him look around before he did something with his right hand. It was the way he looked around that made me run. You know his name." She set down the pencil. Then she picked it up again and wrote another line. "I know his face. I know his name. I've known for 8 years. Then why didn't you write it down?" She pushed the notebook toward him. Because I had no proof. I had only my own eyes, and I was a servant while he was the man sitting to your right. If I had written that name on a piece of paper and handed it to you on my second day here, what would you have done? He didn't answer. She knew he couldn't. So she continued writing. You would have killed him. You would have killed him because of one sentence written by a girl of 19 whom you had never met. Then the other 4 families would have asked why, and you would have had nothing to give them except my word. And within 6 months, you would have lost everything. She turned the page. And I didn't save you so you could become that kind of man. Stefano read the sentence, then rose, walked 3 steps toward the window, and stood with his back to her. He remained that way for a long time. When he turned around, his face was wet. He didn't wipe it, and he didn't try to hide it, because never in his life had he needed to conceal anything inside his own home. You'll hear me say this only once, he said. 8 years ago, you ran through a room filled with armed men to tear a glass from my hand. You paid with your voice so I could live. He paused. Then you remained in my house for 8 years. You scrubbed my floors. You lifted my mother from her bed every morning. You stayed silent so I wouldn't go looking for my own death. And during all those 8 years, I never once asked your name. Anna looked up. Several weeks ago, I stood at my own gate and offered you a check so you would disappear from my life, he said. Do you remember what you wrote to me then? You wrote that you had never asked this house for anything. At the time, I thought it was pride. Now I know it was the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. He picked up the old notebook and placed it in her hands. This belongs to you. My mother kept it safe for 8 years. Anna held the notebook against her chest and wrote nothing more. Stefano reached the door and stopped, one hand on the knob, without turning around. You were right, he said. If you had given me the name that day, I would have killed him. He opened the door. But I don't need you to give it to me now. I have proof, and that man will still sit at the same table with me tonight. He stepped into the hallway. Leave the bag where it is, he said. You'll need it, but not today. 3 days later, Stefano summoned the entire household to the formal dining room. More than 30 people, from Gideon to the gatekeeper, stood along both sides of the table. Julian stood immediately to Stefano's right, in the same place he had occupied for 8 years. Anna stood at the far end of the room. I'll say this once, Stefano began. What happened in the Great Hall last month was caused by my mother's illness. There is no engagement. There is no lady of this house. Anyone who mentions it again beneath this roof can pack their belongings and leave. The room remained silent. This Saturday evening, at the council meeting, I will formally confirm my marriage to the Costa daughter. The other 4 families were informed this morning. He turned toward Julian. Make the arrangements with Mr. Costa. Do whatever you want, as long as everything is settled by Saturday evening. Julian nodded, and during the half-second before he could make his face solemn again, Stefano saw it. The thing a man couldn't hide when he had just received precisely what he wanted. Then Stefano looked toward the far end of the room. As for you, he said to Anna, loudly enough for more than 30 people to hear, return the bracelet to the house steward before dinner. Go back to your old work on the 3rd floor. The 30 days end today. Anna removed the bracelet where she stood, beneath the gaze of more than 30 pairs of eyes, and handed it to the person nearest her. She didn't write a single word. She lowered her head once, then left through the kitchen door. Someone at the opposite end of the table released a quiet breath of relief. The news left the house within 2 hours. By evening, Vanessa's father called Stefano in the voice of a man who had won and wanted to appear as though he had never doubted the outcome. Vanessa didn't call. She sent only one line, saying that she would be there Saturday evening and that she hoped he could keep order in his house this time. The second piece of news traveled more slowly, arriving 1 day later. It was never openly spoken anywhere. It leaked in precisely the way things always leaked within their world, through 3 mouths that should have remained closed. Gideon told the man in charge of the parking lot that he was busy that week because he had to take someone to meet with an attorney. The family's driver overheard that someone was reopening an old case file. And during lunch at a familiar place in Brooklyn, someone heard 2 Ferraro men telling each other that the night 8 years earlier had apparently left behind a witness, that the witness was still alive, and that the witness was about to give a statement to the federal prosecutor's office in Brooklyn. No one spoke a name. No one needed to. By Thursday afternoon, all 5 families knew. Julian was the first person to carry the story into the study. He closed the door behind him. Have you heard what's going around out there? I have. What witness? That's what I want to know, Stefano said. Do you believe it? I believe someone out there believes it. Julian walked around the room twice. Let me handle this. You have a wedding to worry about. You don't need to involve yourself. Do your work, Stefano said. Leave Saturday night to me. Julian left the room, and 3 minutes later, The hallway camera recorded him stopping at the corner of the staircase and making a telephone call for 7 minutes without moving another step. On Friday evening, Gideon went up to the 3rd floor. He carried a small box and sat down at Anna's table, and Anna pushed her worn, hardbound notebook toward him without waiting for an explanation. Gideon opened the spine, peeled back the inner layer of the cover, placed a thin piece about the size of 2 fingertips between the layers, then sealed it again. He tapped the cover twice, looked down at his telephone, and nodded. "It's coming through clearly," he said. "Keep it in your apron pocket as usual. Don't carry it any differently." Anna wrote one line and held it up. "When did he tell me to do this?" "The morning he stood in the dining room and told you to return the bracelet," Gideon said. 2 hours before that. Anna reread her own words, then closed the notebook and slipped it into her apron pocket. Gideon rose and walked toward the door. "Listen to me," he said. "Tomorrow night he won't stand beside you. He'll be at the opposite end of the room with the Costa family, and he won't look at you even once. Don't go looking for him. Let them come looking for you." Anna nodded. Gideon stopped on the threshold. "One more thing. He told me to give you one sentence, word for word. If you asked why it had to be you instead of someone else," Gideon repeated it exactly. "Because he believes you'll never be able to testify. That's why he allowed you to live for 8 years. And that's also why he'll dare to tell you things he would never dare say to anyone else." On Saturday evening, the 5 families gathered in Oyster Bay for the 2nd time in 2 months. This time, there were only men, their attorneys, and one long table. Stefano stood at the head of the room with Vanessa and her father. And just as Gideon had said, throughout those 2 hours, he didn't look toward the server even once. At 9:15, Anna was ordered to carry a tray to the conservatory in the West Wing, where the extra drinks were kept. She set down the tray, and when she turned around, Julian was standing in the doorway. He closed the door behind him. "Sit down." Anna didn't sit. "Then stand." He walked slowly around the small table in the center of the conservatory, both hands in his pockets. "People out there are saying there's a witness to what happened 8 years ago. It took me 3 days to work out who it was. Then I realized how stupid I'd been. There's only one person it could be." Anna didn't move. "Do you know why I never touched you during those 8 years?" He stopped 2 steps away from her. "Because you could never testify. You can't speak a single word. You have no papers. And no one stands behind you. You're the safest witness a man like me could ever dream of having. I allowed you to live because you were harmless." He tilted his head. "Now someone wants to put you in front of a federal prosecutor. I can't allow that." Anna reached into her apron pocket, took out her notebook, and pushed it onto the table between them. Julian looked at the notebook and laughed. "Are you planning to ask whether I did it?" He leaned down, bracing both hands against the edge of the table until his face was level with hers. "I did. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you. Because you're the only person in this house I can tell without having to worry about anything." She left the notebook where it was. "My father served this family for 30 years, and they repaid him by letting a boy of 30 take the seat above mine. I stood there and watched the entire room raise their glasses to him." He tapped one finger against the tabletop. "The first glass belonged to the man being invested. Only one glass. No one else had to die. Then you came out of nowhere and drank it." Anna looked directly into his face. "You want to know what happened afterward, don't you?" Julian said. He stood there with his hand still raised. And if I'd allowed him to remain there for another 3 seconds, he would have turned around and looked at the decanter. Then he would have seen that I was the man standing closest to it. So I wrapped my arms around him and dragged him out. For 8 years, he has gone everywhere telling people I saved his life. I've sat through dinner and listened to him tell that story no fewer than 30 times. The old woman nearly found me. For 3 years, she hired one investigation firm after another. I knew about it by the 2nd year. I just didn't know how far she had gotten until the night she called the company in New Jersey, and word came back to me." He shrugged. "Then she collapsed. I didn't have to do anything. Sometimes fate knows when to be obliging." The conservatory was silent. Anna raised her hand and pushed the notebook a little farther toward him. Julian looked down. Then he saw the spine, where the cover had been peeled back and sealed again. He understood, and for exactly 1 second, his face turned deathly pale. "Have you finished?" Stefano stepped out of the dark corner of the conservatory. He held nothing in his hands. Gideon and 2 other men entered through the side door and stopped there. Julian didn't run. He straightened, and for the first few seconds, he still tried to find his old voice. "Stefano, listen to me." "I already did," Stefano said. "I heard everything." He lifted the notebook from the table and handed it to Gideon without looking at it. "Get it to the attorney tonight." Julian watched the notebook leave Stefano's hand, then looked back at him, and he understood the second thing. The one possibility he had never considered in 8 years. "What are you planning to do with that?" On Monday morning, it will be on the desk of the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, Stefano said, along with the laboratory results from the decanter, the camera drive, the hospital records, and 4 years of payments you transferred to Emmett Shaw's people. The case is built strictly on your personal treason and attempted murder. Our family's affairs remain untouched. But your life as a free man ends tonight. The entire conservatory fell silent. Someone near the side door drew a sharp breath. Julian laughed. The laugh of a man who couldn't believe what he had just heard. You're turning me over to the federal authorities. You, Salvatore Ferraro's son. Yes. Do you know what that means for all 5 families? I do. Stefano stepped forward once. I also know what you're waiting for. You're waiting for me to handle this according to my family's way. You're waiting for me to turn you into a name no one ever speaks again. So that 20 years from now, this will be nothing more than a story people tell at dinner tables. He paused, but one person remained silent for 8 years so I wouldn't become that kind of man. She paid for it with her voice. I won't destroy what she sacrificed for merely because I'm angry tonight. He turned toward Gideon. Take him to the car. No one touches him. Anyone who does will answer to me. After Julian was taken away, Stefano returned to the meeting room. The other 4 families were still seated, having heard enough to know that something had happened, though none of them knew what it was. He didn't sit in his chair. He stood at the head of the table. There will be no marriage arrangement tonight, he said. Vanessa's father shot to his feet. Stefano raised one hand, and the man sat down again. 8 years ago, on the night of my investiture in the room about 100 feet from here, someone put a corrosive substance into my family's decanter. The first glass poured from it was mine. The entire table fell silent. There was a girl of 19 working in this house as a kitchen helper. She ran through the middle of all of you, tore the glass from my hand, and drank every drop to save my life. In the chaos of that night, Julian told us all she was just a clumsy servant who had suffered a sudden fit, and you all went home without a second thought. So did I. For 8 years, you have called her the mute servant. Someone at this table laughed when she stood to clear the plates in Brooklyn. He looked slowly around the table. She is the reason I still occupy this chair. My mother was the only person who knew the truth, and she searched for the man responsible alone until the day she lost her voice. No one moved. He called Anna into the room. She entered through the side door, still wearing her work clothes. Stefano took the bracelet from the inside pocket of his coat. Without saying another word, he placed it around her left wrist before all 5 families. And this time, he was the one who fastened the clasp. Vanessa's father was the first to rise. He offered no objection. He simply stood, and then everyone else at the table followed. No one applauded, no one spoke, but no one remained seated. 4 months later, Julian Rourke was indicted in federal court in the Eastern District of New York on charges of conspiracy to engage in organized crime and attempted murder. Anna accompanied Stefano to a laryngeal specialist in Manhattan. They examined her throat with a scope, took images, and gave her the same answer the document had given 8 years earlier. The tissue had scarred and couldn't be restored. On the drive home, Anna wrote, I already knew. You don't need to be sad. I'm not sad, he said. I only needed to hear it once so I could stop searching for a way to fix you. You aren't broken. What's broken is that entire house, because no one inside it can speak your language. He began learning sign language 3 days later, taking 2 lessons each week from a teacher who came to the house. He learned slowly, just as she had predicted. Gideon began learning 1 month after him, followed by the head cook, then the 2 nurses assigned to the 3rd floor. By the end of the year, 14 people in the house could speak with Anna without paper or pen, and breakfast in the kitchen often unfolded in a silence that an outsider might have mistaken for coldness, until they looked more closely and saw more than a dozen pairs of hands arguing over who had burned the pan. Vittoria was taken to a speech therapist, something no one had considered throughout the previous 5 years, because everyone had assumed she had nothing left to say. She practiced 3 times a week and progressed very slowly. Some weeks, she didn't progress at all. But at her son's wedding, a small ceremony held in the garden of their home, she sat in the front row, and when the couple turned toward her, she managed to speak 1 complete sentence, broken into fragments, but every word clear. I've waited so long. She continued living with her family, and the east-facing window in her room was still opened every morning. The only difference was that now, many people in the house understood why. 1 year later, Anna established a foundation supporting people who had lost the ability to speak, paying for communication devices, sign language classes, and therapy for those who couldn't afford them. The foundation was named October 17th. No one outside 3 people in that house knew where the name came from. One evening in the kitchen, Stefano stood washing 2 cups while Anna sat on a high stool and told him about what had happened at the foundation that day. She spoke with her hands. He answered with his, slowly, made a mistake on 1 word, let her correct him, then tried again. There wasn't a sound in the entire kitchen except the running water. And in the 8 years he had occupied the most powerful chair in New York, it was the truest conversation he had ever had. This story leaves us with something very simple. A person's worth isn't measured by how much they can say, but by what they do when no one is watching and no one is giving them credit. In every home and every workplace, there are people we pass each day whose kindness we accept without ever once asking their names. Respecting another human being isn't an act of charity. It means taking the time to look at them long enough to see who they truly are. Gratitude spoken late is still better than gratitude never spoken at all. We can only hope we don't wait 8 years to express it. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone you love, so that together, we can hear more meaningful stories each day. How did this story make you feel? Is there someone in your life who has quietly helped you, but whom you haven't yet had the chance to thank? Please leave a comment. I truly hope to hear the thoughts you carry deep within your hearts. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye, and I'll see you again in the next video.